are a lot of people interested in pursuing photography today and wanting to be professional photographers, but we've kind of come to this age when cameras have gotten so good that we don't have an understanding of exposure, and I feel like a lot of people getting into this field, they don't understand exposure, and it's quite amazing to me. So if you're gonna be a professional photographer, you should probably understand exposure, even if you don't use it that much actually. So today I thought, we'd do a really long vlog, but I just thought, oh, nobody's gonna pay attention to that. So we're gonna try and tackle this topic of how your camera exposes things in just a couple of minutes. Don't hold me to that completely, but we'll try and do it as fast as possible. Okay, so what am I doing here? Am I crazy? What's going on? No, this is all you're gonna need to understand exposure. So I got my camera here. I'm at aperture priority. I'm at f8. So my camera's light meter is gonna pick the exposure for me. So I'm pointed at something black. So we're gonna get to see these in a second. So I'm pointed at something black. The camera's setting the exposure. And this is gonna be long because it's black, but that's what we get. And I'm gonna point at something white now. So here we go, pointing at something white. You can see the exposure is a lot quicker. And the reason for that quick exposure is that the camera is trying to make this a gray, a middle gray, something sort of in the middle of black and white. And when I shoot the white, it's also trying to make it a gray. So let's try and understand this concept a little bit on a deeper level.
So here we are looking at the two photos we took, and I went ahead and desaturated them because cameras see the world desaturated when they're doing their metering too. They just see in black and white, and they're just looking at shades of gray and how bright things are and how dark they are. So that's how we're going to look at it for the exposure discussion. So as you can see, the black thing that I took a photo of, the camera's trying to make it like a gray because that's what cameras always try and do. Their meters in there, they're seeing a certain amount of reflected light and it's saying, I have to set the shutter speed to this certain amount, which you saw was pretty long there, I think like a 5-second exposure, to get this, whatever I'm looking at, to be a gray. And likewise, when we saw the white thing, the camera did the same thing, but kind of in the opposite. You saw a really quick exposure. Now this photo, if a camera was really trying to do its real job, it would have been lighter, right? Because we're photographing a white thing. So, but once again, it tried to make a gray. So that's what a camera's meter inside of it tries to do. It tries to set the exposure based on gray. So it's trying to make things gray. So when you point your camera out into the world, it's trying to sort of average everything out and make it overall a middle gray. Fast, I went and did another example. I set my camera on aperture priority and I let it set its own shutter speed. So I'm using the in-camera metering here, and look at this photo. It's really confused, right? I took a photo myself and it's saying, well, I'm trying to make this overall scene a kind of gray. And so what it did is it chose this exposure, which is way too dark, right? So this is where it comes in for us. We have to see this and know this stuff when we're in the field and either use one of two things. We have to set exposure compensation, or another thing we could do is flip our camera to manual and just kind of set the exposure ourselves. But as you can see in this next photo here, when we didn't have this really bright thing behind me sort of throwing off the camera's meter, because don't forget what the camera's trying to do is trying to average out this whole white thing back here and these dark areas, and it's trying to calculate an overall gray, which I know you don't see much gray here. That's because cameras aren't very smart. They can't figure this out. It's averaging this with this, and it's coming up with this fact that in its head anyway, I've made this scene gray now. Or I didn't make this photo black and white, but if we did a little calculation and we calculated all these pixels, it would be an average gray. And as you can see in this next photo, when I just turned around, sort of scary eyes, but I just turned around and there's nothing bright behind me now. Well, the camera's doing a pretty good job now. So it's making the overall scene a gray. For example, something you always want to be thinking about, what if this wall would have been black back here? Well, I would have been a lot brighter, right? I would have been a lot brighter. What if the wall was white? This is kind of a yellow wall. Well, I would have been even darker. So there's always going to be things playing with your exposure. That's why in photography, it's really easy to get to usually an exposure compensation. On your camera, you can just say, I'm pointed at my subject right now. These are looking a little bit dark to me. I'm going to have to tell the camera to go, say, one stop more exposed. If you're shooting under the same lighting conditions and stuff, you can just flip into manual and set your exposure and just fire away as many times as you want until you get into another, lighting situation where the lighting has changed or it's brighter or darker, in other words. Lastly, you're looking at me set the metering mode here, and most cameras are going to have 3 major metering modes. One is going to be spot. The next one is going to be center weighted, where it just sort of takes the center and just weights it more. And then the other one is a little bit more complex, but that's the one you should probably be using in your everyday photography, which is just going to be the matrix metering. And what matrix metering does in general is it just tries to take that overall scene and it's really complicated, and the truth is each camera company like Nikon and Canon, they have their own proprietary matrix metering, and it's a little bit of a secret with each company. But for example, if you're taking a photo of somebody and the backlight is really light, well, Nikon may have put some programming in there where it says, well, I've seen this scene before, right? And so they've tried to make this matrix metering really smart, but the truth is, in my opinion, it's not that great. It does a better job, but you can't really know what's going on is the problem. Like where you put your focusing point, a lot of the companies weighted that area a little bit more, which makes sense, right? Because if you're focusing on somebody's face, that kind of makes sense that area should be weighted a little bit more. And just to discuss the other two a little bit, so if you have spot metering, that's if you put that spot right on something like somebody's face, which Caucasians, their skin is really close to a middle gray in a photograph. So it's actually a good idea if you want to get a pretty good exposure to put that spot right on somebody's face, for example, and then set the exposure yourself using that manual dial, and then you're going to be somewhere in the ballpark. Don't forget to stop by my website and check out the new Quit Your Job and Be a Real Estate Photographer course if you're interested in real estate photography. But that's it for today, guys, and I will see you next time.